welcome to the studio today.
Thanks,
I
Tami.
know you arrived last night. Brian's like an old friend of mine. We were 8th grade sweethearts. First French kiss. Yeah, he's a good kisser. But anyway, we brought Brian here today because he is an example of living his truth through the path of joy. And so and his name is JP, Joyous Pleasure. And I'm gonna turn it over to you for a moment because I just want to know like how that name came about and what inspired you to go by another name than Brian.
The high school, junior high Brian. Well, joyous pleasure. Well, I was thinking like what drove the highest level of who I could be and where I wanted to live from, and a thinking process of how I wanted to manifest. And so as I looked at different, ways of being, and then looking at the pleasures that joy brings me, and then thinking about pleasure, because in the relationship of them, as I just said, from how looking at life and looking at others and you and my relationship, and that the joyous pleasure was a nice base to be able to look at life more. And so that's how my name. So then it was self-given.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good one.
Yeah, because I
So
wanted
did
to be
you have other
reminded.
names that you were thinking about?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So it just, it came
Being
because
playful.
it was, playful and organic, and it fit.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
fit. So, when you choose to be on this joyous path, because I know that life, we live in that life of duality here on earth, and sometimes our emotions we can swing that pendulum from sorrow or fear to love, or I know. So Brian, we were talking about, I know the last couple of days we've been talking about that balancing between fear and love and joy. And I know that you mentioned that fear can be what blocks joy. And so can you speak on any level on that, like any experience that you have with that?
Yeah. Well, thinking about fear. Well, like fear, is the robber of joy. And because when you're in a fear state, it's hard to be in a joy state, and breathing and seeing and being solution focused. Thinking about how fear can, I guess the fear of being able to implement new ideas in our lives, and so being in fear.
So like when you were a little kid, what was your biggest fear?
Well,
Were you afraid of the dark?
no.
No. So did you just go back when you were a little kid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Riding our bikes.
Yeah.
It did before when we were riding bikes in junior high.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I guess
know
I was fortunate living in Iowa, and then
Yeah.
something along the line of not being fearful, is, well, I have this saying that I've learned, and maybe it's as a result of how I don't live with a lot of
Right.
fears, because I have the saying of fun first, safety second. And I have 3 children, and I raised them with that thinking process, is because, you know, more of an observer of the situation, of whether if you're like pertaining to doing extreme sports like our family does, motorcycling and skiing and snowboarding and doing edgy stuff. And so you do it with the aspect of caution and good judgment, not fear. So that might
Right.
be an example of putting oneself in a different position because they're fearful. And, you know, I guess then that would be one of the big growth inhibitors.
Yeah, yeah. I know, yeah, I could name like a lot of things I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of a lot in life. Maybe life's just giving me too many things to be afraid of. The latest fear, of course, has been the bats. But I haven't had any bats in my place for over a year.
Excellent.
So we're moving past that fear. And but also we talked a little bit. Well, we also both grew up in Iowa City, so we felt like as our childhood of being raised in that Iowa town, and during that
Safe
time, it was
town.
really safe.
Yes.
And if there were dangers lurking, we weren't aware. We weren't living from that space of fear. So we were playful and adventurous and creative. I know that,
Encouraged.
yeah.
Yeah, to explore and
Mhm.
try new things. And
Yeah. Yeah, so that was a good place to be raised. But I also mentioned, we talked a little bit earlier too, being the gender difference with fear. Through my experience with working with women and on this path of spirituality and the path of the initiate, I've come across a lot of women that we've had times in our life that we were like the prey. We had to be aware of predator energy. So I think that it speaks a little bit different with gender, maybe.
yeah, definitely. Definitely. I can see how that is, and even way back in time when we were growing up, and then just thinking about so many places in the world right now, not world, but just in our country or in this town of Omaha, and thinking about fear, and there's just a lot of fear of going on, and it's right. And so one has a choice of how they want to bring fear into their lives. And so it's kind of like, you know, an observation, and then where one comes from when they're observing something, and then you have that choice.
Right.
You know, to be fearful or not fearful.
Right.
And so what are you making that decision on? Fear is it like fear of your life, or or is it fear of some non-material thing, of inner thought, of something that isn't even real. So
Right.
one's fearful of something that's not even real for them.
Right. And so fear, I like that you said that fear is the inhibitor of joy. And so tell me the thing that makes you most joyous. Is it company that you keep, something creative that you do? On the road in your RV, going down the highway?
The Adventure Lodge. Well, I think just the very highest level of itself, and just observing myself being joyful, and then Right, yeah, so, yeah, that, but, yeah.
Yeah. The passion.
Being
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
present, you know, I think, well, yeah, like, being in the present, you know, the gift of the present,
Mm-hmm.
because, you know, the past is what then creates a possible, an illusion of fear for the future. So if you live in the present and see it as a gift, and then just fully be here, then you're more capable than if you think of things from a joyous, positive outcome. Then you can then observe the present moment,
Right.
and then make a judgment of what to do personally.
Right.
So you're not living, making decisions based on some sort of non-reality in your mind. You know, making decisions based if you're in dangerous situations that you deem dangerous, then you know you would, and you had been there before, then that's why you take precautions to equip yourself when you go back into a situation that could be dangerous.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And that's, I always make relationships back to the wilderness and the environment. When you said, "Oh, my fearful grizzlies."
Yeah.
Yes, you know, when I'm in the backcountry.
Yeah.
Yeah, grizzlies.
I was on a hike with my high school girlfriends, which you know from Regina. We actually encountered a bear,
Yeah.
and somebody asked, "What was your first reaction?" Well, first, my heart about stopped. Then I got my camera out and took a picture. And then, thank God, the bear just kind of got up. He was really like tired and walked up the mountain, left us alone. But he was laying like right on the path, and so
You
immediate
startled them,
fear.
right? Yeah. Right. And
Like,
that's like, yeah.
Do you run? Do you what are you supposed
Your
to do?
bear recall.
Yeah.
Well, it's different for a black
A
bear
brown
or a
bear.
grizzly. Yeah. So
My daughter said run downhill because I can't run downhill so much.
faster than your buddy.
And just make sure you're faster than the slowest person that you're with, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, so fear, I mean, there are those
Yeah, oh,
obstacles of
right,
fear
it's so like-
that we face in our life. But staying
Drawing.
fully present
Right.
and making those,
Good judgments.
yeah,
And where they,
Yeah.
you know, they come from.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
that is where, not fear-based, as I was saying, fun first, safety second, is the thinking of using, you know, that caution in bear
Yeah.
country, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking like if I go out by myself, because at least with other people there, I felt there's a safety in other people, I think. Whether, for me there is.
Mm.
Like
Oh, yeah,
if you're in
oh,
a
absolutely.
partnership or you have someone to bounce it off, you know, it's not just your
That's
own
right.
mental experience, I mean, craziness going on. There's a foundation that, in numbers that I feel like there's safety in that sometimes.
And they also maybe like support your beliefs and your values.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so sometimes when we're faced with fear, right, we weren't gonna talk about fear. We've talked about fear a lot. But is it because you have to face your fears to find joy?
Can't be fearful of change.
Right,
And of new, and then, you know, attachment, and then the security that familiarity gives creates, a more secure type of feeling, and that then changing that is like fearful because there's comfort, you know? So, yeah, so that's why,
Like you have to shake it up, stir it up, do something a little bit different.
right, well,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
And
know.
so the question again was,
Well, you said that fear inhibits joy. So then, when we are able to face our fear, does that help expand our vision of joy, our experience of joy?
well, okay, so the fear in a relationship that's to joy like that is, it's that, as I was saying earlier, the not real, not real, not real danger or something of so fear, and so it's about how you would be on an inner secure type of with oneself, because that is where we're both, you know, judgment and fear and joy and happiness, you know, would, comes from like an insecurity of oneself is probably one of the largest barriers to that path of joy, to reaching joy. And I think the word Unita, Sanskrit, is like Buddha said, there's the 4 immersibles, and 3 of them are related to one's self-growth. Mm-hmm. And the last one, Unita, is about joy, and it's about outward expressing of, you know, of joy of others. Mm-hmm. And so with that thinking of how there's so much work that one would need to do to evolve, you know, to enlightenment, as Buddha said, and then when you were able to obtain more of a deeper knowing of what, and practice of Nimitta, and you're practicing the others of meditation and inward reflection and growth that then help one to progress to where they you know, have that higher, maybe the higher vibration.
So is it
joy.
like being of service?
No.
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 Compassion?
No. Mm-hmm. You know, those are other practices of the immersibles. Mm-hmm. And those are very important, and that's why I you know, mentioned that, is that so much of our current thinking and teachings are around looking inside of ourselves to be the best that we can be. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a personal growth and expansion, and it's centerly focused. And so then, as you then said, this is the outward one. So yeah, I would then now say that, you know, but it's not the service orientated part. It's the, like me seeing here, that I love seeing your studio, and it's so joyful to me to see your bowls, and knowing that you know how to be able to resonate those to you know, to bring emotions inside of the body, or in the practices that you do, and just you as a person. And it's me seeing you in that light, brings joy, and so that is why I really enjoy having you in my life.
Enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's finding joy in others.
Yes.
Simple. I mean, it's not simple, but I mean simple. Simply finding joy in others.
Right.
And so what are those barriers that we fight? What keeps us from finding joy in others?
Judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Judgment. And so
Like, give it an example.
well, observation.
Yeah.
Is that if one can look at something
Like, what kind of judgment? Like, what kind of emotion would be attached to that?
to judgment?
Yeah, I mean, give an example of what keeps people from finding joy in others.
Well, I guess judgment, that's interesting, because if you're being judging of someone that,
Yeah, so give an example of the judgment. What would your judgment be against somebody? So we were talking a little bit about finding joy. The path to joy is about finding joy through others. Accomplishments or just
not through others.
for others?
Yes.
For others.
Of others, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, would be, Minita.
Right. So what keeps us from that act of simply finding joy for others?
Why doesn't it
Yeah, why
all
is
just
it?
come so
Yeah,
easy and
naturally.
naturally and
Yeah.
inherently part of our personal disposition in life?
Yeah, why can't we all do it? Come on. See, simple enough, right?
Right. Well, it's quite simple. Well, that's why there's all these paths. I mean, so many of the people that are listening to this know that there's so many self-help books out there, and there's so many preconceived limitations that we put on our lives, preconceived of like fears, limitations. For some reason or another, we people choose to encumber themselves with these fears or beliefs that keep them from having like the courage to be able to explore another way. And when it does come to joy, to move past like envy or jealousy, is that why isn't that happening for me, then goes back inside of who one is, and then that is their belief of who they are, and then the insecurities and fears that they have, that then they're just too wrapped up in self to be able to see others.
Right.
And that's why, I think that's why, the Buddha in many practices, you have meditation and you have these reflective reflective ways to be able to create a harmony inside oneself. And so, that's why most of the work that people do revolves around that.
Right, absolutely, to get to that place.
Right, yeah.
And I like the example you used too about, you can find that, for an example of finding joy in others, a lot of times is through when we watch children, or our own children, or maybe a loved one or a pet, when we see them, experience life without fear or expressing creative gifts or just
Yeah,
simply
creative, yeah.
playing in
Right.
a natural,
Right,
organic way.
exactly, right.
So if you want to begin to expand your understanding of how joy works, is to continue to see those moments, recognize them, perceive them, and then begin to expand that in other
Right,
people.
yeah, it can be learned,
Yeah, yeah,
definitely, and like, because then it feels good to you.
yeah,
You see, there's a nice little, you know, side to joy is that then that's what overall, the benefit that you have in your mind, but also in your body.
yeah,
And the experiences that you now can have with your mind and body that previously one might not be able to because of, you know, the limited thinking and insecurities and fear.
yeah. And I also like that one that we talked about earlier too in a previous conversation was greed. Because we also feel sometimes, I think I see it a lot right now, like somebody is going to take something from us
Oh,
if we're joyful for them.
yeah,
Which leads to judgments and fear and down a rabbit hole when we are
that what, that,
down a rabbit hole.
but what leads
fear.
one down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, if
like
you
you're
are
saying?
afraid of someone taking something from you. Like for an example, like people in our country right now are afraid that their guns are going to be taken away, or their rights have been taken away, or if you feel like something might be taken from you.
That
Like
then
in greed,
prevents
it prevents joy.
joy. Well, I would say that the relationship that I would have with what it is that you just shared was it's the choice of who one is around. And so, you know, that's part of the process of being comfortable within oneself, and then the company that they hold around them. I would say that is more of the company that one holds around them. If you're fearful of somebody, you know, of taking something from you, and that prevents you from being joyous because you're having to live in fear, then it's the company you choose.
Yeah,
Not you, or one
No,
chooses in that
no.
example, of course.
I'm just saying, like, I mean, you know, yeah, those are big. That would keep people from being in joy, because it's judgment again, that somebody's going to take something from you.
Yeah, you're being you're being fearful.
It can be take money, it can take your job, it can be take your, you know, your home, your whatever you're afraid someone's going to take.
Or take,
Car,
take
your lover. I mean, there's all kinds of things.
or take something out of context, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, that's.
So you
I
just
mean, the
think
lover idea. Go ahead.
It's just as simple as changing the audience or your community.
Well, I was thinking if someone is the question of taking something from like me and asking me the question, that's kind of what prompted me to say of company, one's company. But if I hear that question again, when thinking about relationships, I thought that resonated with me. A lover is being fearful of that you're not going to be loved, you know, then taking the idea of someone then taking somebody who loves you away, right, is, that's, reflection of how one feels about themselves and the insecurities that they have
Right. Right.
of themselves.
Mm-hmm. So it comes back down to insecurity again. All of it comes back down to. So how do we break that pattern of insecurity? I feel like in my life, breaking insecurity for me is just facing it a lot of times, or recognizing it, because I think sometimes I act on things that I don't even know that I'm insecure about, and so then you act in maybe that kind of way, maybe through jealousy or judgment, and then I look at that and go, oh my God, it's my own insecurity that's made
holding
me,
up these walls.
yeah, that was put myself in this limited space.
Right, and then I hear what you're saying, and then that judgment on, that thinking versus, being, an observer, and then helps to,
Yeah,
not
so
be-
like if I
catch
have
yourself in judgment.
yeah, and you can feel it in your body. It doesn't feel like joy in your body when you're judging somebody, and you get, your blood pressure goes up maybe a little bit, and all of a sudden there's some righteousness, and then for me, those are the signals for me that I have to take a moment and go, oh,
Right.
what is my part in this?
And I like that, what you were saying, because you're observing yourself, and I think that's part of this is, is not judging and being so harsh on ourselves, and
Yeah.
observing ourselves, and because I know we're talking about observing outside elements, and then having a choice of how to be reactive to it. And so the idea then of being an observer of ourselves, and not being and I think that's part of the answer to any type of new behavioral change that one wants to make in their life is, becoming an observer, and then realizing that what just transpired or went down is a pattern that previously in the past did not, allow myself to move forward. And so being an observer, I have now observed that, and I realized that was a limiting belief that I had earlier. So then
So give an example of that in your life.
And so then
An exact example of that in your life. Something that you observed about yourself that you knew it was a past pattern that you wanted to change.
right. And so
Like a story. What's a story? Because I think people can relate to that better.
right. I think that that even regardless of what my story would be of a personal reflection, it all gets back down to being that observer of yourself and knowing that there is another way that I am choosing to be. So then that allows for change to happen quicker, because you're being an observer, and you know what it is that you wanted to create a change in. And so, I think that regardless of the situation, if I give you like a personal one of how it was how I look at that question that you just asked me in the present moment, and giving you an example of observing myself, of how I would give a reflection on choosing a type of a change in thinking process that you're asking. Giving an example is just thinking that I cannot do something that so by then yeah, ask the question again.
Well, I just wanted a personal story behind it. Like I'm sure you've bumped up to things in your life that have made you stop and observe. Like you're calling it an observer self, so we can look at ourselves doing this act down here. And so what is an example of that?
Well, I think it's a good one is what I've just been through is because I live in Asheville, is where I've lived for a long time, born in Iowa. And then I found my way to Asheville, North Carolina, and I don't know if any viewers know about what Asheville is like, but it's really it's an East Coast hub for free thinking, and so I really have found that I really like Asheville because of being around like-minded people, and so then as my travels have been, and I've spent the summer in Oregon for a while. All summer exploring Oregon and being in Bend, Oregon, and so I think the thinking of as I travel across the country from Idaho and Montana and Omaha and seeing what is happening with the pandemic, the mask deal, the Trump deal, and observing people and family members in this idea of fear and how it's so different here in relationship to like Oregon or Asheville. So I think then what
you are in the blue dot.
I know, and so
we are in the blue dot in the center of the country.
I know. That's why I always think that Omaha. It's kind of like, and that's why I so much appreciate about you because you bring so much enlightenment to Omaha. God, I just think that's incredible.
There's
and that brings
lot
great
of
joy.
Good people in Omaha doing this work. There's a lot.
Yeah.
It feels like it's gaining some kind of momentum.
Yeah.
And so I'm really proud of Omaha. That's why I have to yell out, we have the blue dot.
I know. That is exciting. I like that. Because that is a thinking. And that's like where I was going to with this reflection on your question was it's how one can be proactive of the environment that they put themselves in. And so you ask that of a challenge, and so I find that values and beliefs, I'd much rather surround myself with people that have, a similar value and belief. And so that makes it, for me, it makes it a lot easier to be living in harmony.
Yeah, more freedom to be yourself, expression of yourself.
No, because I have that freedom wherever I'm at. It's the thinking process of like kind, and then if I'm around people like you, and that's why I am here, is because I enjoy how you think about things in life. I like how you use sound and breath and body movement to connect body and mind. And I really appreciate you doing this type of sharing and delivery now. And so that's a choice then that I make, and I'm here. And so then it's so easy because then our minds just continue to expand. We're not dealing with basic philosophy differences with you and I. And so that's a choice where I spend that with who I have around me. So I think then that definitely then, makes it easier to be joyous, is that you're around people that are supportive of who you are and see and celebrate the joy that I have, like your excitement for my life and what's going on. And then that just naturally you feel that connection and acceptance, and then that creates desire, and as I desire to be JP, joy and pleasure. So I choose joy and pleasure, and I choose that as a thinking process, and so I choose to be around people and surround myself by joy and pleasure, and I create joy and pleasure.
Harmony brings that about.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to begin to wrap this up. So there's a couple things I want to ask you. I think we already hit our yin and yang question. Talked a lot about fear and the opposite of joy and those things. That the yin and yang question will be something that we'll bring regularly to this table, and it's just about bringing duality and the opposite end of joy. I think that there's fear and insecurity that lie in that judgments.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we tackled that really well today.
Yeah.
And then, what I wanted to ask you is what are you creating right now, and to make life better, not just for yourself but for others and for the planet? And is there anything that you're marketing of late that you want people to know about, or are you in service to others right now, as far as getting the fortune? So if we want to get a hold of JP, how do we do that to support you?
Well, Tammy, that would be in the cosmos.
I'll meet you out there.
Okay.
Here we go. Get off your rocket ship and come down and tell us.
Okay. See below. It's BWM at bnc@gmail. Yeah. Oh yeah, feel free. Oh, I'd love it to hear something from anybody that sees this that would like to chime in. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. So I think it was success.
Mm-hmm.
First time out, and hopefully we'll be here again.
Well,
maybe before you leave, we'll do one from the couch.
I like that.
With a
From
beer.
outside.
Oh, the beer.
There we go.
And
Yeah.
so, but we are going to break today, so thanks for joining us. I hope that we have expanded your vision of how to find joy, or find that path of joyous pleasure, and to expand that, especially in the word of Buddha, the Sanskrit word Manita.
Yeah.
And so finding joy for others. So
Yeah, in others.
and in others.
Seeing joy
Yeah.
in others.
Yeah,
Yeah, just simple joy.
joy. Yeah.
Well, and thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tammy,
Yeah,
for
this is
inviting me
awesome.
here and having me think out loud.
I know we're thinking out loud. And guess what? We didn't even turn on.